I think you should keep it.
I agree. Yeah, just do
We're
that.
live.
Okay, we're live.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I apologize, first of all, for the sunglasses. Unfortunately, I had some eye surgery this past weekend, and my eyes are still somewhat sensitive to light and also the computer screen. We will have, I hope, to be a relatively quick meeting today, and we will be reconvene, I think, on the 17th. There are a couple of administrative things I think we need to go through. First of all, to make certain that we are prepared for the meeting on the 17th. And I think there was a requirement, Rachel, that we all sign a disclosure of conflict form. And I want to know essentially where we are with it at this point.
Right, the non-disclosure from MSDE. So I believe that at this point, everyone has submitted that or is about to submit that. So then everyone will have access to that, and then we will be discussing it in closed session at next week's meeting.
Okay. So if you have not done so, please do so that it allow you to have access to the information so that we can have a thorough, informed decision next week. Today's meeting will only have one item on the agenda, and this is the response, if any, that we want to give to the General Assembly regarding a proposal made by the Maryland Department of Education and the superintendent. Rachel will guide us through this, but I want to make certain that we all have at least had an opportunity to look at the request, or at least the proposed legislation, and a copy of the proposal that we submitted, or at least provided you, in order to have a full review of our potential or recommended response. So why don't you walk us through the original request and our response? And I would say that that response is a purported response, a recommended response, because we have not acted on it. Rachel had done a wonderful job of pulling the thoughts of some of the various components that are out there to put us in a position, I think, provides us with a strong position, both legislatively and also programmatically as we go forward. So Rachel, why don't you walk us through that component?
Sure, and I'm gonna keep my camera off today because I'm not feeling well. So, but I'm gonna share my screen. So hopefully everyone can see my screen here. And as the chair said, at the last meeting, Superintendent Chaudhary went through in more detail the additional proposals that MSDE had for items for the General Assembly and the AIB to consider in terms of the timeline for college and career readiness, and also having to do with the automatic withholding of funding from LEA. So the first item at the top here, right now in the blueprint law, the CCR support pathway is supposed to begin this coming fall of 22. And the CCR support pathway is the pathway for the students who aren't college and career ready by the end of 10th grade. Then the pathway for the students who are college and career ready by the end of 10th grade is currently supposed to begin in the 23-24 school year, so 1 year later. And what MSDE has proposed is to delay both the CCR support pathway and the post-CCR pathway to the 24-25 school year. So the CCR support pathway would be delayed 2 years, and the post-CCR pathway would be delayed 1 year. Superintendent Chaudhary essentially made the point that it's just too much for the LEAs to be able to implement the support pathway this fall. And clearly with the pandemic and still dealing with the results and the learning losses from the pandemic, that, you know, you can certainly see that that will be very challenging for the LEs to be able to do that this fall. He does want to postpone everything another year, though, to provide for an additional year, for essentially 1 year for MSDE to do the planning, and then the next year for the LEAs to do the planning. And what I was recommending is to, similar to the provisions that the AIB proposed to be changed to the Governor and General Assembly in the first letter, where we focused on deadlines that were upcoming that need to be adjusted now, and we really can't wait. So what I'm proposing is that we postpone the CCR support pathway by 1 year. So we would give the LEAs the additional year, and MSDE the additional year to plan for the CCR support pathway, but not to make the next step of adding another year of delay. That would allow, during the comprehensive plan process, for the whole sequencing and timeline of college and career readiness to be discussed, you know, for lack of a better word, comprehensively. And if everyone believes that another year is needed to be able to implement the pathways, then the AIB could recommend that in the first annual report. Every year, the AIB is required to submit an annual report to the Governor and General Assembly in November, and that report is supposed to, you know, report on the progress being made with the implementation of the blueprint, any challenges or barriers that are occurring, and any recommended legislative changes to the law to address any of those issues. And so that would be the recommendation here, would be to postpone the support pathway for 1 year. So that would, you know, take the immediate urgency off the plate for the LEAs for this coming fall, and allow everyone to go through the comprehensive plan process and be more clear about what the timeline will be moving forward. So that is the recommendation for the first MSDE proposal.
Why don't you go through?
Do you want to take them one by one?
No, let's go to the second one. So
Okay. All right. Then the second one has to do with the automatic withholding of funding. So under the blueprint law, beginning in fiscal 23, so the upcoming fiscal year, 25% of the increase in blueprint funding for an LEA, so the annual increase, is automatically held back from each LEA. And the AIB determines whether those funds are released each year. And in the first 3 years, so fiscal 23 through fiscal 25, the criteria for the AIB to release funds is based on whether the LEAs submit an implementation plan and whether their plan is approved by the AIB. And so MSDE has made a couple of points here. They've proposed that the withholding not begin in fiscal 23, but be pushed to fiscal 24. And one of their reasons for that is that the plans will likely not be approved in fiscal 23. Now, I think that the AIB has every intention of working its way through the LEA plans so that they can be approved by June of 2023, which would be in fiscal 23. But that would put the LEAs in the same situation that the AIB was still potentially could be in if House Bill 1450 doesn't pass, which is that we get a lot of our money at the end of the fiscal year and you can't spend it and you have to revert it. So I don't think we would want to put the LEAs in that situation either. And so, but rather than completely pushing off this new mechanism under the blueprint, the recommendation is to modify what the criteria is for the AIB to release the funds in fiscal 23, to just make it be based on the LEA submitting a plan by the new deadline of March 15th, 2023, that meets the minimum guidelines. The AIB is required to set minimum guidelines for the plans. And so it would simply be, somewhat of a compliance type of release of funds, but they would have to get the plans in on time, and they would have to make sure it's a plan that, meets all the minimum criteria. So then the third item also has to do with the withholding of funds, and it actually relates to the calculation of the funds to be withheld. And MSDE pointed out a potential drafting error that would call into question the legislative intent of whether funds were actually supposed to be withheld each year. And so to remove any potential misinterpretation of that, the recommendation is that the General Assembly clarify how that calculation occurs, to just make it clear. And what the issue is that in the law, it's oddly confusing to know what year to refer to when you're talking about fiscal years. So the wording is used sort of interchangeably sometimes in drafting: current year, upcoming year, prior year. And so, and if you don't get those words in the right order, then it could be, there could be no increase in funds, which is what MSDE pointed out. And so that's a simple technical fix that, is easy for the legislature to make. So so the idea is that obviously you all need to discuss and decide what you want to do. And then the AIB would send another letter to the governor and presiding officers, and to the House chairs who sponsored the House Bill 1450, just providing them with the AIB's recommendations on the amendments that MSDE has requested to the bill.
Okay, based on sort of summarizing the 3 points, we have one, which is basically the technical error that we need to clarify in terms of the interpretation and the intent, which is the last one. The second one is that we're going to remove one of the conditions for the 25% reduction. And the first one is we're going to at least accept a 1-year extension as opposed to a 2-year extension on the CCR. So let's have any discussion we need on all 3 of those particular points. And Mindy, please recognize them, because I can't see who may want to speak.
And I did also, there's one more slide.
Okay.
So I put that on the screen that just provides a little more detail on what the CCR implementation timeline would look like based on this recommendation. So I can walk through that, or if you all want to.
Why don't you go ahead?
Okay, so essentially, this is sort of based on MSDE's timeline that they had developed. And so the first part here with school year 21-22, which is this year, and 22-23, the CCR standard would remain what it has been. The state board, I think at their last meeting, adopted the standard in terms of what assessments would be used and what scores on the assessments would be needed. For the upcoming school year 22-23, the research studies into the CCR standard would be occurring, and that's what we'll be talking about next week's meeting. And then there would be significant amount of planning, collaboration, and technical assistance with the AIB, with MSDE, and with the other technical assistance to be provided, particularly as we work through the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan process. And that is when there could be a real deep dive into all of the components that need to occur for the CCR implementation to move forward. Then for spring of 23 is when the target is for the CCR standard to potentially be revised. we know that it needs to be based on 10th grade, not 11th grade. The bigger question is, what are the specific things that students need to know and be able to do to be successful in entry credit bearing courses in community college, and also whether measures other than assessments will be used to determine whether students meet the standard. And then in the summer of 2023, there would be, again, significant planning and implementation assistance with both the AIB and MSDE. And then under the proposed timeline from the AIB recommendation, starting in school year 23-24, both the support pathway and the post-CCR pathways would begin. The word begin, I think, is an important one because it doesn't necessarily mean or have to mean that every student is able to participate in the pathways in the first year. So that's something that I think, again, it needs a lot more discussion, which is why I think it makes sense to have that discussion as part of the comprehensive plan process to figure out what is a feasible phase in of the pathways. And then there would also need to be course and content sequencing back to pre-K, because the idea is that whatever, this is the most important thing, I think, in the blueprint, is that we have our new college and career ready standard that we know we want kids to achieve by the end of 10th grade and definitely by the end of high school. And then that needs to be back mapped all the way through all the grades down to pre-kindergarten, so that we've got students on so that they have a pathway and a trajectory across their school years to actually be college and career ready by the end of 10th grade. So that's a reasonable expectation for every student. And then, as I said before, during the comprehensive plan process, if additional changes are needed, that is when the AIB can recommend these changes for the next session. And hopefully, while the comprehensive plan can be updated each year, hopefully it will be it definitely needs to be a living document, but hopefully this first drafting of the plan and development of the plan will be where any major changes that the AIB thinks are needed would occur at that point, and then hopefully that would sort of be the plan until proven otherwise changes are needed.
Anything else, Mindy?
Nope. I do see hands. Mindy, do you want to?
Yes, I have Dr. Dawes and then Mr. Harris.
Thank you. Talking about the CCR gets me excited. The CCR, as Rachel kind of alluded to or said, is like the heart of the matter, or the North Star of the blueprint. And it requires an extremely heavy lift that involves and directly impacts many, many entities. However, we know that based on the commission research that it has been done and it can be done. And we have a new superintendent who's bringing in new energy and a steadfast commitment to the blueprint, and who represents a practical way for us to get there. So revising the implementation date of the support pathway, and I say revising instead of delaying, I think it will provide sufficient time to do this right, while maintaining the spirit and the intentions of the blueprint. I do have a concern about the post-CCR pathways, being that I lived and breathed some of those post-CCR pathways, and in that world, I understand the intricacies of what it takes to be able to do something like this. And I just want to make sure that we do it right, and that I don't want to say that we pay close attention to the timeline and the dates for that post CCR pathway. I just want to make sure that because we have this tremendous opportunity to do this, and all of this, it gives us an opportunity to work more closely together, MSDE and all of our partners, and to make sure that we do this and we keep it moving forward. But we also have to make sure that we are doing it right and providing sufficient time. So I'll stop right there. And I know Fagan has some things to add too.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Doss. It seems to me that we're balancing two kind of significant realities. Like one, there's the reality and the will of the blueprint and the desire to get this done. And Rachel, you said it, Dr. Doss said it, like this is the heartbeat of all of this reform work that has happened all of these years. And so there probably is no more serious matter than this question. And that was all contemplated at a time when we didn't have a global pandemic and we weren't seeing unprecedented turnover in the classroom, unprecedented strain on LEAs and our education system. And so I think we really owe it to MSDE and the local LEAs to, at a minimum, I think, form a working group around this so that there is no daylight in terms of visibility into what it takes to get this done. Whatever result we end on when we kind of come to evaluate at the fork in the road, there should be no surprises, not to this board or to MSDE and their board or any of the local LEAs. Like if this is indeed the heartbeat of the blueprint, then we need to devote an inordinate amount of mind share to how this gets implemented and all of its cascading effects. And we need to have the operational visibility into the burdens and responsibilities that the superintendent and his team and all of these LEAs are carrying. I hear it in Baltimore City daily. I got an email about it this morning where teachers and principals are saying, please, God, help. Like we having a hard time just staffing classrooms, let alone implementing something of this scale and significance. And so I want to just be on the record that I think it's super important that we have the utmost visibility into this and that we're integrated with MSDE to land on whatever path that we end up doing here long-term to see this implemented.
I think that, and thank you for your comments. I think that the proposal that is outlined from Rachel provides us with the maximum flexibility with both of those options, i.e. to have the rigor that is required, but also to be supportive of the superintendent, the board, the local boards. In so doing, this proposal does not automatically remove any adjustments. It is simply postponing to the comprehensive plan at least some components of that for further consideration. And so I don't see that in adopting the proposal, this will materially take away our ability to make adjustments as we see fit. But when you place into legislation or into the law an automatic 2-year delay, then I think that we are landing on the other side of less rigor than we need to, especially at this time. We may need that, and the comprehensive plan review will provide us with an opportunity to look at that. As Fagan has said, we're going to be working closely with the superintendent and his people. So if there are some changes or alterations we need to make, we can make those along the way. But to place it in legislation at this point in time could, in fact, send the wrong message in terms of our rigor, especially when we do not have to do that right now. So I think this proposal, in my conversation with superintendent and others, really tries to thread the needle in a way that gets to that balance that Fagan has just talked about.
Dr. Kerwin has his hand up.
Yeah, I want to support what Ike just said. I just feel that to make a decision right now that we're going to, no matter what, delay 2 years, when we don't have nearly enough information. It may be that we get to that point sometime next fall as we start working through the implementation plan, but it's possible that we could have a more or less complete implementation plan by October. We're going to have the open hearing, the public comment period, but it could be one where the public is thrilled with it, and we're more or less done in October, and that would give the LEAs from a considerable length of time to begin putting together the CCR pathways by the following fall. We may not get there, and we can make an adjustment at this time. But I think about the kids that if we were ready and could do the implementation, what it would mean to the kids who don't get the advantage of that. So I just feel that we should keep the door open, that we might in fact be ready to begin an implementation, and for the benefit of all those students who would be able to take advantage of the pathways in that year. And I totally agree. We got to do this with transparency and full cooperation with the LEAs and MSDE and joint working groups. However, we're going to make this work and make a collective decision. If we get to the point where we realize it just can't be done, okay, then as was mentioned, we can put in our report to the General Assembly that yes, in fact, we do need to make this delay. But I don't feel comfortable coming to that point right at this moment.
I see Dr. Lynch and Dr. Stapleton.
I just have a technical question. I think when we heard from the superintendent, part of the concern was that developing a support pathway before having the final report, sort of indicating what are the career standards, seem to be putting a burden on our school systems to create pathways that may need to be adjusted or to change. And so my technical question is there an opportunity to accelerate the timeline of that assessment? Because if the assessment isn't complete until the September of 2023, that I understand the superintendent's, sort of thoughts. But I also agree with Ike and Britt that we want to be, moving forward as quickly as we possibly can. And is that perhaps a way that we could accelerate this process?
So technically that report is due by September of 2023, but on the timeline, and I can share my screen again if you want, the superintendent's timeline, even under current law, is to try to have the CCR standard revised by the spring of 23. So I think that some sort of acceleration is sort of already in that plan, but we could certainly talk about that more next week.
I think I'm up. I would love us to think about how messy education is and how it's very context dependent on whether programs implemented at one location or one district will work in another district. And I'd like us to think about that definition of when the post-CCR pathways are rolling out. And what does that really mean? Does that mean that there's a perfect curriculum that's suddenly available to all students everywhere in every school? I don't think we should expect that. That's not going to happen. But I think if we consider that there is an attempt to pilot some work that is based on sound evidence-based research, that is an effort moving forward to address that post CCR pathway. So I agree with Dr. Lynch about we really need to understand, you can't plan for a curriculum before you know what that cut point is. And so that has to be decided in a pretty early phase. And I'm very interested to look at that proposal for the CCR evaluation and study and think about the timing of when that would happen. But I think if we can be flexible about thinking about what does it mean to start rolling out a post CCR pathway, then I think that it's fine to stay with that same, like only change the first date that's in our current proposal. But be flexible in how we think about how they're meeting that requirement of rolling out that pathway in 23-24.
I think that's a good point. And I think that if we follow through what Fagan said earlier, that we are working with them, so we would not be off in a corner, and that they are part of this comprehensive plan for which we are looking precisely at that question, we might be able to address it in a more thorough manner, make certain that it is not lost in that process. And this is why I like this approach, because it gives us the opportunity, to raise that question that I think you just so eloquently described, but also to address it and make adjustments as we think are appropriate along the way.
I do not see any other raised hands at this point.
Well, there were some questions earlier about this approach. I do not want to place us in a position whereby we're constantly at odds. Hopefully we can have some additional conversations with the superintendent and others. But I want to convey very clearly, my intent is to try to work through this, to come up with a viable solution that adequately responds to the legitimate question that he's raised, but also provides us with additional opportunities to ensure that we have that vigor that the plan originally called for. We very well may later on this year come back and make some adjustments and address those questions that Fagan, R, and others have raised, so that we can make certain that we're all on one accord. My position is that hopefully we'll take this in the spirit of a cooperative partnership rather than to look at this in an antagonistic way. I believe there's a way in which we can address both sides of this to ensure that we are responding to those legitimate concerns. My real question, though, is having an automatic 2-year hold in legislation could be challenging for us by perception, and also providing us with the rigor that we need. But we may ultimately get there, but it will not be because we did not try to achieve the objectives in the interim. I apologize for my voice, but it's part of the surgery the other day, and so I've been weak from that. Are there any additional questions? I'm not going to call for a motion on this. This is a sense of the body that we could go with this, with all of the considerations that we've just described. That is providing just a one-step approach to the 25%, so that that does not burden them, making certain that we adjust the language, forward into the committee, just our concerns about that, and the committee ultimately will make its decision about what it wants to do, recognizing that we want to work with the board to ensure that this question is not totally resolved, that we can very well come back to it when we look at the comprehensive plan later on this year. If there's no objection, I'll take that as the sense of the body. Okay. All right. Mindy or Rachel, are there any other concerns or questions raised?
No, just, we have our meeting, next Thursday at 3 o'clock, and it will be longer. It will definitely run at least 2 hours.
Yeah. And by the way, I did have Rachel forward to the superintendent this response that we had so that he was aware, at least our sentiments and what we propose, so it doesn't come as a surprise. Okay, the motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, second. All
Second.
right, all in favor, say aye.